Hello everybody and welcome back to Round the Outside here on the Speed and Shoot podcast with a recovered Adham and slightly
I'm still not fully recovered, but
you know, we're gonna try our best. Last time went pretty well, I'd say. So
of course, and I mean we've been away for a while. Chinese Grand Prix was cancelled, wasn't it? So
yeah, I mean a month of that. Why are we having month-long breaks?
Yeah, this was a big
after
break.
3 weekends. That's ridiculous. I mean, surely they could have planned for this, right? They could have sort of sensed that the Chinese Grand Prix wouldn't go ahead and maybe not do this, because now we've got 5 races in 6 weeks, which, I mean, for us is great, but I'm not sure how happy the drivers will be about that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's alright though, because you've sent an email to the FIA, haven't you? So
yeah, I have sent them my personal
their
view
customer
on
service role got back to you.
Yeah, they don't normally get back to me, but, you know, maybe this time will be different. So this podcast, we're going to talk about the events of the Australian Grand Prix, and we've had a lot
happened
to digest all that happened in that particular weekend, and also just give our thoughts on Baku, which is coming up soon as well at the end. So without further ado,
a lot to talk about. So we're going to start at the beginning of the whole weekend, first practice session.
You know, we thought we'd even talk about practice, because even in practice,
I mean, a lot happened, and
we
we never. This is the first time we're ever covering practice sessions, but
you know,
a lot did go on.
So just in FP1 alone, we got 2 red flags and a GPS issue where cars couldn't
communicate with their teams,
and that meant that they couldn't tell people to get out of the way, and there was a lot of misses.
I mean, there was already loads of drivers complaining about the traffic anyway. What made it worse was drivers that just weren't getting out of the way for other drivers who were trying to put in hot laps.
Mm-hmm. So lots of drivers were going off track, and there was a lot of high-profile errors from high-profile drivers. For example, Verstappen spinning at turn 4, dips a tyre in the gravel, and
at turn 11
had some more issues, which I'm sure he won't be happy with.
Nope. His teammate Perez also went wide on turn 3 in the first practice session.
Yeah, Perez was having trouble all weekend, and it sort of culminated in this qualifying.
Yep.
Yeah, and obviously other incidents like Yuki Tsunoda, Magnussen, gravel a couple of times.
We also need to talk about the Mercedes drivers. So FP1 session was over, and during that session, it wasn't looking too good for Mercedes, because Russell stated that Red Bull are a second down the road. He said
Russell's normally a bit of an optimist.
Yeah, exactly. And what didn't help was Hamilton also admitted, he said that it could take up to a year for the Silver Arrows to, you know, get back on track.
I mean, it so happens that when Hamilton speaks the most negatively is when Mercedes can turn up, and it's just what they did this weekend.
Yeah,
I remember last year in Canada, Lewis Hamilton said he's never felt so disconnected from a car, and then he sticks it on the podium. So, you know, you can sometimes take what they say with a pinch of salt.
Exactly. Another Hamilton thing, on turn 11, he had quite a, you know, close call sliding around the track. However, you have to say he handled it quite well. He didn't go off the track. He carried on driving.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't really bother him that much, did it?
Last thing to mention is the Williams just died.
Logan Sargent just, he was like, my car just stopped working.
But yeah, at the end of FP1,
which was unfortunate.
It was Verstappen with a 1:18.7, and then Hamilton and Perez followed closely behind.
Yeah, Perez was half a second behind his teammate, and Hamilton was 0.433 behind Verstappen. So, I mean, thing about practice results, you never really. How do I say this? I mean, I say, you know, I take it as it is, like, oh, okay, you know, this is that. However, until the qualifying
you can't really
sessions,
tell
you can't really tell, yeah.
Because, you know, teams will trick you into thinking that that's all they've got this weekend, but really they're just holding off their maximum performance for quali.
Exactly.
So, yeah, you can never really take it too much to heart, but it can give a good indication sometimes.
Exactly.
On to FP2. So
FP2 was started raining in FP2.
Yeah, a bit of rain,
which caused a few problems for some of the drivers.
Problem is with the rain, especially because FP2 is supposed to be the quali run where they test out the 1 lap pace. So to have it raining is not particularly ideal. The track was very busy at the start, and
about it being busy, we have to talk about this. So Perez went on a hot lap where he was blocked by an Aston Martin, which he wasn't really happy about. He let his team know about that. On his next hot lap, he was then slowed down by an Alfa Romeo, who didn't move out of his way in time. And then his teammate Verstappen blocked Sainz on a hot lap, and Verstappen claimed he had no idea that Sainz was on a hot lap. He was like, "Mate, how am I supposed to know?"
Yeah, just absolute
if he's
chaos.
on his lap.
Absolute chaos.
Which obviously, I mean, in racing, the thousandth of a second matters, and in a hot lap, if you get slowed down even slightly,
that'll ruin your entire lap.
It's ruined your whole lap, and obviously, that also causes problems because then your tires are just a lap older by the time you have to redo your lap.
That these issues did not trickle into qualifying. Thankfully, it looked okay for the most part in quali, but yeah, obviously, lots of issues in practice, and the rain sort of culminated in sending most cars back into the pits.
Yeah, I mean, talking about the pits, before it started raining, I'm pretty sure it was, Norris was very eager to get out on track. He fishtailed out of the garage and almost crashed in the pit lane, if you can remember that. And then, still on Norris, as the rain started to fall, he went off track. I'm pretty sure it was into the gravel trap.
Yeah,
I can't remember which turn, but
I mean, lots of racers got well acquainted with gravel traps over the weekend.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Lance Stroll, a little love tap to the wall.
Yeah.
Nothing too serious. However, when the track got wet, Lance Stroll also went off track multiple times as well.
Yeah. I don't want to be too critical of him because, you know, even the high profile drivers, your Verstappens, your Perez,
of course,
were also making mistakes.
Of course.
I mean, Alonso got the fastest lap before the rain started, and then after.
Yeah,
that,
he was lucky enough to get that lap in before the rain started. That was a 1:18.8 for anyone wondering.
And that was followed by Leclerc and Verstappen as well.
Yep, and one thing we do have to talk about as well. I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I found this out in the highlights of FP2. I must have missed it, but because of Alonso and Gasly's penalties for the starting positions in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, the grid boxes at Albert Park were widened by a whole 20 centimeters to prevent this.
I mean, in my opinion, while the penalties are a bit harsh, they're also, I feel like they're inconsistent because sometimes you see shots of the grid, and some cars look even wider out of position than Alonso and Gasly were, or Ocon, sorry. And yeah, no penalties. So I just think that it's a bit of an inconsistent rule. So it's good that they're maybe being a bit more lenient on it.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, you're right, Ocon. I don't know why I said Gasly. That's my fault. However, yeah, I get what you're saying. I think the reason they did it is because when drivers receive penalties before the race even starts, then, you know, even when they're trying their hardest and they manage to get, you know, podium place, it is always in the back of their mind that is more or less not going to count because once this penalty's applied, then they're going to go back.
Yeah, so obviously, if they serve it in the pits, that's one thing, but you know, it ends up being a massive.
I'm pretty sure Ocon's scared to serve it in the pits. I think he's got some sort of post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
Because what was it? I can't remember now, but we did cover it in our other episode. But I think it was like 0.6 of a second, or
no, it was much less than that. I think it was like 0.1.
0.1 or something, yeah, of a second when his mechanic made contact with the car. And by made contact, they literally meant touch the car.
Yeah, you're not allowed to touch it at all.
But obviously, in racing, like I said earlier, like every given, you know, second counts. And rules are rules, you know, even if he does touch, even if he breathes on the car, if the rules state that he can't do it, then you can't do it. You've got to respect the rule.
I mean, the problem is, obviously, we want rules followed to a T, but unfortunately, sometimes there can be inconsistencies, and that's when I think that fans and teams get a bit frustrated.
Of course.
Just a final thing on FP2, Alfa Romeo and Haas ran new power units for this race.
Yeah.
However, unlike Ferrari, they're using it within that allocation, so there's no penalties for them.
Yeah, so about that, I was going to say... What was I going to say? Yeah, so like you said, Arhan, it's within their allocation, so no penalties. However, it's the third race of a 23-race calendar, and teams are running new energy stores or new power units, you know, within the third race. You have to ask yourself, like, do you think that's smart? I mean, obviously, it doesn't really come down to, like, a choice. If they have to change it, they have to change it. But, like, for example, Ferrari's even worse. You said they got a penalty because they've used their allowance already, and we're in the third.
I think there needs to be a conversation said about the number of allocated engines that are allowed. I think if it ends up being the whole grid at some point has to take a penalty, then you have to sort of decide.
That's right. Yeah.
Should they be allowed more than that?
Of course.
But then again, if the rule's the same for everyone, then it doesn't really make a difference in the end.
I mean, as time goes on, the cars are developing. People are introducing more and more, upgrades to the car and stuff. And eventually, you say to yourself, as time goes on and everything gets upgraded, the energy store and the power unit might not be able to last as long as it used to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's I mean, for now it's all right. But like you said, if it gets to the point where almost the whole grid is receiving penalties because they've all changed their energy stores by the end of the season.
It's rare that a team won't take an engine penalty at least once a season. So I think when it comes to that, the FIA might consider it. But I think they almost would say if it's the same for everyone, then it doesn't really matter if everyone has to take a penalty at some point, because it would be unfair if a team, for example, had really good reliability and didn't have to change their engine as much. So yeah, I think it's something to be looked at, but shouldn't be changed for now. But on to FP3. What have we got?
Right, FP3. First of all, it was raining.
We mustn't forget.
We mustn't forget that it's been raining. But yeah, the whole of FP3 it was raining. We'll get onto the lap times.
It wasn't raining the whole time because there was some soft tyre runs. But yeah, there was a significant amount of rain.
Right, yeah. Well, I said we'll get onto the lap times in a minute, but we do have to say Verstappen did put in the fastest lap, 1:17.5. And the reason talking about that is because that was the fastest lap of the weekend so far. Like, it was faster than FP1 and FP2.
Which is weird because FP2 is normally the quali session, but it was obviously riddled with rain and GPS and all that rubbish. So yeah, one funny thing that happened was Esteban Ocon got his shoe stuck on the gas pedal. So
not to the point where the car wouldn't slow down, but to the point where he got into the pits, stopped the car, and he couldn't get out because his shoe was stuck.
So yeah, that was interesting.
Yeah. Also about the Alpines. This was the last race of the pink Alpines.
Which is a shame. I really like the pink Alpine.
I remember in our first episode, you were saying how much you liked it.
Yeah, I think
red Alpines.
I mean, people.
Sorry, not red Alpines, pink Alpine. Where did red come from?
To be fair, red Alpine. That's not a terrible idea. But
let's hope the Alpine team are listening to our podcast.
Yeah, I don't think Otmar's listening to Speed and Shoot in his free time. Not that he probably has much, but yeah. So the GPS issues were gone for the most part. There was some traffic issues like Russell almost colliding with Stroll in turn 6. And then just some more high profile errors. Perez locked up on turn 3, went off track on turn 13, which is sort of more foreshadowing of his issues in qualifying. Perez and Leclerc hit the gravel in turn 1, Magnussen, and there was a red flag for the debris.
The debris from just before turn 9. But yeah, about Magnussen going off track, we must state that was on turn 13.
Yeah.
Of the other parts.
Which proved to be an issue for quite a few drivers. But yeah, that was the final practice session, and it was Verstappen, followed by Alonso and Esteban Ocon, doing quite well.
Yeah.
Which brings us on to qualifying, which is definitely an interesting
What an
session.
eventful qualifying that was.
So it started off with Logan Sargent sliding off track turn 13. Perez...
That was due to a lock-up, I believe, on his front left tyre, but I could just be making that up.
And after all of Perez's issues, they all culminated into on his first hot lap in Q1, goes off, gets beached, and that's it for his qualifying.
Yeah, Perez couldn't actually put in a time at all because on his, that was on his hot lap that he went off.
His first hot lap.
Yeah.
But yeah, that brings us on to a conversation I think that needs to be had about gravel traps, because
we could all agree gravel traps are designed to punish the driver errors. So when you go off on the gravel trap, even if your tyre clips it a little bit, you have a very high chance of just spinning off the track.
Yeah, I mean, it's there, but it's also there for safety in terms of it helps bring the car to a halt so it doesn't go barreling into the wall.
Yeah, I mean, for example, Yuki Tsunoda's in practice when he went off, I believe it was FP1, he was quite lucky not to hit the wall there. The gravel did slow him down quite a bit.
Yeah, but I think there also comes a risk of, for example, at the start of the race, sometimes you're forced onto it and then you're beached and you can't move, and that's your race or qualifying over. But obviously, safety is the number one priority. However, I think if there's a way to make it so that cars can get slowed down, but also it doesn't stop them from continuing the race, I'm sure it's not that simple. Otherwise,
Yeah.
they would have done it. But yeah, it's definitely a conversation to be had because we see it a lot, especially at Albert Park, and it can ruin races really.
We have to talk about, well, if you're done with that, we have to talk about Piastri, which is home Grand Prix.
Yeah,
Australia, his first home
F1
Grand Prix,
start,
F1.
At Albert Park, and unfortunately, he doesn't make it into Q2.
No, good job. No, never mind. I thought he made it into Q2.
Oh, no,
couldn't
no, he
make it
didn't.
into Q1.
Yeah,
That
it was
my
super.
fault.
It was super close. His
It was
teammate,
quite. He did. I feel. He did try his best, and you could tell by obviously Crofty and them lot were talking
cheering
about him, and it showed you his
Yeah.
POVs and everything. He was giving it his all. But then
Yeah,
again, every
the crowd
driver gives
behind
it their
them.
all, doesn't it? So
But maybe perhaps there was a bit of pressure, and maybe it got to him a bit because the McLaren was faster than a Q1 elimination.
yeah,
Norris gets into Q2, however, goes off track, and again he had a few issues in practice, and unfortunately misses out on Q3 as well. So in Q3, Alonso puts in a provisional fastest lap of a 1:17.3.
yeah, which gets displaced by Hamilton, who puts in a 1:17.2.
Yeah, and at that point the quali looked really close, and then Mr. Max Verstappen brought us back to reality by putting half a second on the field.
Yeah, he makes it look easy. Like, I can't say Verstappen's my favourite driver. However, you can't deny that he is one of, if not the best driver on the grid right now.
I mean, unfortunately, when you think it's close and you get your hopes up that it could be a really close qualifying, unfortunately,
Then you hear that Honda engine come
you
around
just see it across the
in
line
the Red Bull.
just half a second, just easy. So it finished off with Verstappen on pole position, followed by Russell and Hamilton. But yeah, definitely a strong qualifying for Mercedes, who out-qualified both Aston Martin and Ferrari, who are their main competition at the minute. Yeah, it just shows that perhaps they're getting that act together, and maybe with the month break that I complained about earlier, perhaps they could be even closer in Azerbaijan.
Yeah, and we have to talk about, in this month break, Christian Horner announced that Red Bull will be getting 2 new upgrades on their cars.
As if they needed upgrades.
As if they needed upgrades. I personally don't know what the upgrades are. I've probably missed it. However, yeah, like you said, Adham, as if they needed upgrades, they're just going to be even more powerful now.
So I was sort of wondering about, you know how Red Bull broke the cost cap and then they obviously had to serve reduced wind tunnel time, and I was thinking they're even faster this season compared to the other cars than they were last season. But then I saw a quote come out, I don't quite remember who it was from, but they said that Red Bull will feel the effects of that penalty or punishment later in the season. So perhaps that's something to keep your eyes peeled for, and we'll potentially see. But yeah, I think that concludes our thoughts on qualifying.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to Formula One, anything could happen.
Yeah.
Literally anything. Sometimes it could come down to it not being the driver's fault at all. Like we're going to get onto Russell in the race.
Yeah, poor guy.
But yeah, like you said, we could very well see the damage later in the season.
Yeah, exactly. And we just don't know it.
Which I'm here for. I'm not going to lie. I just want to see something exciting happen.
I want to see some close competition. At the end of the day, Formula One, you get to see quite a lot in terms of in-depth, and you get to be quite involved in terms of the coverage, in terms of seeing the teams and behind the scenes. However, at the end of the day, there'll be a lot that we don't know about, and we'll only see later in the season when it comes to fruition.
Right, now, let's move on to the race. What have we got to cover in the race?
So, first of all, I think off the 5 red lights, we have to mention how strong Mercedes had, how strong the start was from Mercedes, with Russell getting a great move over Max Verstappen into turn 1, and then Hamilton, who really pushed it to the limits, but I think it was hard but fair racing, getting the move into turn 3, and that puts Mercedes in a 1-2 early in the race, which is very exciting.
I mean, personally, Sorry, were you saying anything else?
I was just going to say because it showed that they can match the pace, which later was disproven, but at that point it was quite exciting.
I mean, yeah, I was going to say Russell's turn 1, Hamilton's turn 3, and Verstappen's overtake in the DRS zone. I think those 3 are contenders for overtake of the race.
I think you saying Hamilton's overtake into turn 3 would be quite a statement for the Red Bull fans to hear, because they're obviously fuming that he didn't get a penalty.
Yeah.
But as I said, I thought from a neutral perspective, I thought it was hard but fair racing. I don't think he pushed him off too much.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little bit biased from me because I really like Mercedes. If I had to support, I mean, Formula 1's not like football. You don't really support a team, but obviously you have fan favourites. And for me, I think Mercedes. I really want to see Mercedes do well this season.
I think you tend to have allegiances more than. So, for example, I'm pretty neutral. At the moment, I don't really particularly see Red Bull doing as well as something enjoyable, just because I want to see competition. But, you know, to be fair, if it was more level-headed, I just think I'd enjoy the spectacle, to be honest. So, yeah.
Yeah, with that covered, we have to talk about Leclerc going off on turn 3.
Oh, Charles.
Now, it's a weird one because when we first saw it, everyone thought, Stroll pushed him off, tapped him, he lost it, whatever. However, after the replays, it was obvious that it was nothing really to argue about. Stroll had his teammate to the right. He was pushed so close to him, he couldn't go any further, otherwise he was going to tap Alonso.
I mean, at the end of the day, he had nowhere to go. Unfortunately,
exactly.
Leclerc's race had to get sacrificed, and it was just a racing incident. But obviously, the Ferrari tears are still rolling.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say that as well. The stewards, it was officially classed as just a racing incident, and the stewards said they're not going to investigate any further, because what would you want Stroll to do there? He's not exactly going to brake in a race, is he? Because the car's behind him, he's not going to go to the right. I mean, he couldn't go to the left anyway, because that's where Charles was.
Yeah, just unfortunate in the end that it had to end Charles Leclerc's race. But we move. The next big incident obviously happened when Alex Albon sent it past the after that long straight, just decked it into the walls, got beached,
lost his front wing,
all over the track, and that's when the safety car gets pulled out for the second time,
and a red flag.
Yeah, but first under the safety car, Russell and Sainz pit under the safety car.
Yeah, you're right. They
would get an advantage. Unfortunately for those two, and I think this was poor from the FIA. The red flag came out after, I think it was 2 laps under the safety car.
Yeah, I was going to say they let the safety car, do a couple laps and then pulled the red flag out, which that is more than enough time for cars to pit if they were going to pit. You know what I mean?
I just think it's unfair that. I think they have to be better at judging and just saying, all right, it's a red flag straight away. And I'm not one to say always bring out the red flag, but I think in this situation it was clear that the gravel wasn't going to be cleared off easily, and
it was clear because
needed.
The rear of his car was still on the track as well.
Yeah, so obviously
and it was obvious he's not moving. The driver had to get out. Driver's not going to get out with cars flying by on the track in case. I mean, if anything as simple as a car spinning out and clipping the back of his car could be quite dangerous to the to Alex Albon as well. So it was. I agree with you. I don't agree that the red flag should always get brought out. However, in this instance, I personally think it was quite obvious that it was going to be a red flag.
Yeah, and I think when you have thousands of pieces of gravel spattered across the track, it's obviously going to have to be cleared out somehow. And to get stewards on with their brooms,
when you need to bring when you need to bring out that big heavy machinery to lift the car and move it. I mean, like the car wasn't moving. It was obvious. I mean, the most it moved was after the initial crash. He did drive forward a little bit to try and get off the track more, but like I said, the rear of his car was still in the.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately for Russell at the time, it was it
would have been a great idea if it wasn't a red flag. Yeah, it would have been amazing.
But it wouldn't have helped him anyway, because eventually we'll get onto what happened with him later. But
yeah.
In terms of obviously what happened in the race after, Hamilton then takes the lead because of Russell's pit. He goes down to P7. So obviously after the restart, Hamilton maintains the lead into turn 1 and for a couple laps until DRS is activated.
Until the Austrian man comes around the corner with his Honda engine.
The Dutchman. in his Austrian car.
What did I say?
You said Austrian.
Oh,
Well, that's the Austrian team.
No, I probably was thinking of Red Bull. I meant to say Dutch. The Dutch man. He was born in Belgium, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he technically has like 4 home Grand Prix.
Yeah.
He's got the Dutch Grand Prix, the Belgian Grand Prix, and obviously the Red Bull Grand Prix, the Red Bull home Grand Prix, and the Red Bull ring. So yeah, plenty of love for Max Verstappen, even if it's not coming from you.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sure he's not losing sleep over it.
Listen, I'm sure he's a nice guy. It's just I don't know why, but he gets quite irritating on the grid sometimes. But regardless, he's a great driver, and no one can argue against that.
And obviously, no one can also argue with the Red Bull's pace in terms of DRS, especially when it's such a long straight. Verstappen retook the lead from Hamilton, and then
I mean, Verstappen so far, Bahrain victory, Saudi Arabia second place, and now Australia victory as well. But yeah, that was I remember Crofty saying it. We know how effective DRS is, but examples like this really. I mean, I know Red Bull probably has better pace than Mercedes anyway, but you can't deny that DRS does have a big, effect on the cars.
Yeah, I mean, DRS is great for overtaking. It's not so great for people trying to hold the lead when they're not in a faster car.
Of course.
But yeah, obviously we're not going to complain. DRS
I mean,
is
wasn't
great
it
for the sport.
Wasn't it introduced for the time lost on corners?
Yeah, so essentially the whole purpose of it is the dirty air in corners makes it too hard to overtake once you get to the straight because you've lost too much time. So DRS basically neutralises that time that you lose in the dirty air.
Exactly. There's more rules on it as well. I mean, you can't activate until 2 laps into the race.
Yeah, and I think they're thinking about changing that to 1 lap.
Really?
Although the whole reason why it's 2 laps is just so that cars can space out a bit before, so there's not too much bunching up, I suppose. But yeah, obviously Verstappen retakes the lead after that.
I mean, I'm happy as well. I think we saw it in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix at but now I can't remember which Grand Prix it was, but lapped cars now. It used to be so if a car gets lapped and they're 1 second within the car that lapped them, they can activate their DRS.
Which is stupid.
Which was stupid. However, this season I'm pretty sure they've scrapped that. So now if you see blue lights, blue flags, you move to the side. They overtake you. If you're within 1 second of them, you don't get to activate, which makes more sense because in theory you're not a second behind them. You're a whole lap behind, a lap and a second behind them.
A minute and a half.
You know what I mean? You're a whole lap and a second behind them, so you shouldn't be allowed to. But I'm glad that's been scrapped.
But yeah, so after Verstappen takes the lead from Hamilton, there's a bit of a quieter period before Russell eventually recovers to P4, and then his car spontaneously combusts into flames, which is just sort of.
I'm sure you guys have seen the AI voices now of the drivers, but that one was funny. Toto telling him that he's on fire.
Stop the car, you're on fire.
Yeah, George saying thank you, Toto.
I can really feel this car underneath me.
No, George, you're literally on fire. There's no metaphor about this.
But I do love those AI voices.
Of course, yeah.
It's so much fun.
But it was, simple for Russell. He just pulled over to the side. Hopped out.
Yeah, pulled over. I mean, it was only a virtual safety car because he was at the end of the pit lane, so they could just pull it in.
Yeah, I mean, still, I feel really bad for him. I do.
The poor guy, that literally culminated his whole weekend because after... It's just bad luck. He performed so well, so gets P2 over Hamilton.
He is a great driver as well.
Obviously, it would have been a great strategy to pit under the safety car, and who knows how the race would have turned out if the red flag got pulled out at the right time. And then obviously, the engine blowing up at the end is not ideal, especially because Mercedes normally have one of the most reliable engines in terms of...
Was it the engine that actually blew up?
Yeah, I think it was the engine.
Oh, right.
It was an engine failure. But yeah, it's strange just because Mercedes are pretty much the most reliable team in terms of engines. So
I mean,
yeah. Obviously,
loads of people have been saying this season, after, for example, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, it's embarrassing for Mercedes because Aston Martin is, and I quote, a copy and pasted version of the Mercedes.
Yeah, in terms of the engine.
I mean, I saw that on Instagram. You know when a friend wants to copy your homework and you say just change a few of the words.
Yeah,
so they won't notice.
The Aston Martin.
That's literally
Mercedes
Aston Martin.
engine and Red Bull's design, and just puts in a better car than Mercedes for the first 2 races. But Mercedes will be relieved knowing that the pace was there. in this particular Grand Prix. Whether it was due to their development or whether the track just suited their car more, we won't know until we see more races. But for now, it was a strong weekend despite the reliability of George Russell.
Of course. And the next biggest thing after Russell's car blew up, Magnussen. I remember it was funny because the cameras just switched on his car, and then you squint a bit. You're like, am I seeing things or is his rear right tire not there?
Yeah, and then in the replay you see he just sort of kissed the wall on the way out, and his whole tire.
It cleanly just took his tire off.
Yeah, and then you just see a clip after the tire just sat there in the middle of the track while the cars are passing.
That's the whole reason the red flag was called out, not because of his crash, because he retired safely. However, there was a tyre just sat in the middle of the racetrack.
I mean, this one was debatable. Verstappen came out after and said he wasn't sure that a red flag was necessary, and I kind of agree with him, to be honest, because your safety car comes out, all the cars bunch together, and then a steward can take the tyre and leave.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that the red flag was particularly necessary, although Hamilton did come on the radio and say that there was a lot of debris. So, you know, it's debatable.
Yeah, that might have
I think it's a 50-50. They could have brought the safety car. But yeah, it was the red flag in the end, which did set up a very exciting end to the race.
Yeah, I mean, we restarted. Technically, it was the third time they're starting again.
Third standing start.
However, you made a good point. You said the first start isn't a restart. Obviously, it's just the start of the race.
So it was the
second restart. Technically, this was in the 57th lap out of 58 laps.
So we got two racing laps. We were all licking our lips, and then unfortunately, what followed was not the most ideal way to.
I mean, we were all licking our lips because for it to restart with 2 racing laps to go,
Hamilton and Verstappen on the front row.
Yeah, and all the cars are bunched up together again. You never know. However, all the cars being bunched up together again also caused a mess, didn't it?
Absolutely chaotic.
A huge
we could have written
mess.
a whole podcast
just on that last lap.
On this last lap, but we're gonna keep it short and sweet. So we got Sainz, who obviously tapped Alonso, coming out of turn 1,
which resulted in him getting a 5-second penalty. Talk to me about that 5-second penalty.
Well, here's the thing. I think if you isolate the incident, he did tap him, and it is Sainz's fault, I would say.
Yeah.
But I think you really have to use context in these decisions because, A, the whole field was bunched up, and it's difficult to judge, and, you know, he's watching a lot of things, and it's an unfortunate... I wouldn't say it's too dissimilar from what happened with Stroll and Leclerc, but yeah, unfortunately, the FIA did view it as a 5-second penalty, which, as an isolated incident, I would understand, but in this situation, the lap didn't count in the end. It was reinstated. It was neutralised.
So do you think his penalty shouldn't have counted either?
So here's the thing: how can you give a 5-second penalty for something that didn't happen under a race technicality? Like, if we're gonna be like technical about this.
Yeah, I get that point. However, for example, Alonso probably wouldn't agree with that. I mean, he got pushed up. Sainz was in a podium position, wasn't he?
Yeah.
He was third. That was until the 5-second penalty.
No. He was 4th, and then he taps Alonso and then becomes third as a result. So if he was not penalised.
So in theory, he would not have got into the podium anyway.
Yeah, but he was still robbed of. Well, he would say he was robbed of 10 points.
Yeah.
Or 12 points. Sorry. So yeah, I think, especially when the race finishes behind the safety car at the end, 5 seconds takes you from 4th all the way to the back of the field. I think, as Sainz described it, was a bit too severe, and I think they have to use more context in these decisions.
I mean, what was more chaotic than that was the teammates.
I mean, I said this in the first podcast we did. I said it will happen at some point. It happened earlier than I thought. I mean, Gasly and Ocon colliding, both out the race.
Both DNFs, yeah. I mean, it wasn't a small crash.
Yeah, an absolute nightmare for Alpine. And I mean, both drivers came out in the interviews after and just said, "Look, nothing personal. These things happen. Blah blah blah." But on the inside,
it's
they're
obvious.
Probably fuming with each other.
I mean, like you said, they say these things happen, this, that, but I can't help but think it was quite an awkward conversation back in the paddock.
Yeah,
I mean, the Alpine's principal just staring at both of them.
Yeah, I don't think things are lovey-dovey there at the minute, and I think it's going to be telling in the next race how whether they're still gonna cooperate as well as they should be.
Yeah.
And I said in the first podcast, I said I want to see what happens when they first have their first incident, and this is their first incident.
I mean,
properly.
we also spoke about. I mean, we covered Verstappen and Perez. However, Russell and Hamilton, we were saying Russell might start getting under Hamilton's skin a little bit because they're both great drivers. However, Hamilton's legacy and how long he's been with Mercedes, he wants that number one driver role, and so does Russell. And like you said, Toto came out and said we don't favour a driver over the other, but in Formula One, sometimes your biggest rival ends up being your teammate.
Yeah, exactly. And you're always pushing to try and get ahead of your teammate, and I think that's when you can get incidents like Gasly and Ocon in Australia, like Ricciardo and Verstappen in Baku.
Of course, yeah.
Like Hamilton and Rosberg in Spain. These things can happen when you're pushing to the limit. I think this one was slightly less severe just because of all the chaos that was happening.
Yeah.
It clearly wasn't something that either driver intended to happen.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it looks bad on Alpine, but I really don't think it was as deep as some people are suggesting.
I mean, the cars that slid out off the track wasn't the reason for the red flag. It was the DNF for both Alpines.
And I think that
caused it in lap 57, which just resulted in everyone just crossing the finish line behind the safety car, didn't it? So that's how the race ended, yeah.
No more racing laps. Lap 57 was neutralised, and the race finishes behind the safety car with Verstappen taking the checkered flag, Hamilton P2, and Alonso completes the podium.
Hamilton did quite well. I mean, Verstappen and Alonso so far have been on the podium in every race this calendar. You just have to ask the question: are they both going to be on every podium?
Yeah.
I mean, Alonso, we said in the last episode, he's the guy. Great seasoned driver. He knows what he's doing.
And
people didn't expect him. I mean, people didn't expect him to perform this well under Aston Martin.
I think a lot of people saw in pre-season testing that Aston Martin had the potential, but I think the most people saw them finishing was P4 in the constructors.
Well,
they didn't think they would break into that top 4.
Right now they're tied. Are they still tied with Mercedes for second
Mercedes
place?
Lead, I think,
Mercedes
by
lead.
a couple points. Actually, no, because Russell DNF'd and Stroll finished P4.
I'm pretty sure they're tied for second place. I mean, we can have a look.
Sure. I think Aston Martin lead just because Russell DNF'd. I'm not 100% sure, but
regardless, they're quite close to each other anyway. Even if one is above the other,
that's going to be one of the closest battles in terms of the constructors. But
I mean, Stroll in Saudi Arabia did quite well, didn't he?
Mm-hmm. And Stroll once again did well.
Not Saudi Arabia. I'm pretty sure his car died.
No, he did well until his car died.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I thought we were talking about the driver.
No, I'm on about I was on about points. I said the wrong Grand Prix.
Yeah. In Bahrain, obviously he did well, and in this race, I think he did well. Nearly threw it all away though with that lock up on the restart, but luckily that lap didn't count for him.
Stroll was one of the drivers in practice, and I want to say qualifying, but I can't really remember who was sliding around the place. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, was he the one who went off on the so-called Perez corner?
Yeah.
Yeah, he wasn't he? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think overall, after the first 3 rounds, Aston Martin will be one of the happiest teams.
I mean,
Red Bull will be one of the happiest teams.
If we remember back to the Bahrain Grand Prix, I remember we spoke about it, and also if you remember, we were watching qualifying and or was it practice? I can't remember. But Alonso was locking up quite a lot, and we were saying this is his first Grand Prix in this car.
Give it time.
He didn't
even need that much time.
No, he didn't. He was in podium in that race.
Yeah, it was in practice. He was locking up a bit, just trying out different setups and stuff.
Yeah, and how when he came to the corners, and obviously you have to brake. Then
But yeah, so Aston Martin, Red Bull will be very happy. Mercedes will be looking like they're moving in the right direction, and McLaren are also making small steps forward since their first 2 races, which were a disaster. Ferrari. Well, I mean, what do we say about Ferrari, man? No,
you can't really say anything. I mean,
I think the science thing was unfair.
There are 2 types of pains in this world that can't be compared with anything. One's being a Tottenham fan, one's being a Ferrari fan.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm saying it could change.
Ferrari are the most successful team in F1 history. But
right now, it can change. However, Yeah, man.
I mean, if you look at this
poor
point,
signs.
at this point last season, Leclerc was leading the championship by like 40 points, 2 wins, 1 P2, and now he's on like 8 points, a DNF, 2 DNFs,
Yep.
and
Bahrain can't stop working.
1 P6.
So let's get this straight. Bahrain can't stop working. Saudi Arabia had 10 grid space penalty to start with.
And finished P6.
Finished P6. And in this Albert Park circuit...
Didn't even finish one sector. It's just...
He was off.
Someone get the Ferrari tissues and please just distribute them to an Italian in need, because they need you in this tough time. But it's actually quite disheartening to see, and hopefully they can...
Of course. I mean, they get extra pressure on them in the Italian Grand Prix in Imola and Monza. That is because obviously that's where the Ferrari's from. And Leclerc, for example, in Monaco, he's still yet to win a Monaco Grand Prix. To be honest,
I really don't think that Ferrari have the pace. I mean, we've seen in 2021, for example, obviously Mercedes and Red Bull were on another planet in terms of pace, but Leclerc was still able to stick it on pole in Monaco, even if he didn't get to start the race because of the gearbox issue. But, you know, it'll be interesting to see whether he can have that fight and drive in him to get another pole position at Monaco. But that's something we'll see, I guess, in the next few weeks.
I mean, Monaco is one of those tight races that overtaking is... I mean, obviously it happens, but it's just a lot better. It's one of them races that if you do start in pole, you have a massive advantage because
unless you're Charles Leclerc.
Yeah.
Last season, starts pole, finishes P4. Someone explain, please. Explain.
I mean, do you remember? I'm pretty sure it was 2 seasons ago now. Perez in qualifying, just going straight into the wall.
When was that?
In Monaco, and then Sainz spun out, tapped in.
No, that was last season.
Last season, yeah. That's it. Yeah.
That was the Crashgate thing where people were like, "Did he do it on purpose?" But yeah.
I mean, I don't think he did do it on purpose. At that point, it was quite tense between Perez and Red Bull. That's when the contract negotiations were, going to take place as well.
I think to be honest, if he admitted to doing something on purpose, surely you'd get fired.
Of course, I don't think he did that on purpose because, like I said, that's when it was a bit tight with Red Bull. Obviously, he wanted to still race for Red Bull. He won that Grand Prix though, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Monaco, yeah.
Due to Ferrari screw-ups. But,
so, obviously, after qualifying, Horner wasn't really happy with him. It was already tense between them two. However, he won the Grand Prix and...
got that new contract.
He did. Because I remember covered it in Drive to Survive, Horner said they don't like any, uncertainties within the squad. They want to keep all the relations together, so they just gave him a contract as soon as they could. You know what I mean?
The question is, will he get past 2023, or will there be pressure from Daniel Ricciardo?
That is another thing. I mean, Ricciardo said in an interview very, very recently that for now he's fine. However, he doesn't want to spend the next few seasons of his career as a reserve driver. He literally said that, even if it wasn't word for word.
He's not one to settle for a lesser drive. Otherwise he'd be at Haas right now, probably.
I mean, I've been seeing jokes and memes about it all the time. However, behind these jokes it's a level of seriousness as well. Everyone's been saying if Perez complains about anything, just like that, Red Bull will make the switch and put Ricciardo as... Because for a reserve driver, Ricciardo's a great driver,
You can't forget that Daniel Ricciardo is one of the most talented drivers in the world.
Of course. So I don't think that if he had to race instead of Perez, I mean, Perez is also a great driver, obviously. We call him the street circuit specialist.
Yeah.
But like I said, their third option is a very, very, very solid option if they chose to go down there.
Anyone who think that Daniel Ricciardo suddenly lost his ability or his drive just because it didn't click with McLaren, it would be silly to write him off, I think.
Of course, yeah, so, no chance. But
we'll see.
Yeah, like I said, if these jokes I've been seeing about Horner just putting Ricciardo as the so-called second driver, to a level it's not a joke,
Yeah, it could happen.
It could happen.
But obviously we've been a bit sidetracked here. But I think that concludes our thoughts on the Australian Grand Prix. Let's just talk a bit about Baku, which is coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sprint weekend in Baku.
First time that sprint's being held at Baku. What do you think of the sprint?
I don't mind sprints. However, when it comes to Baku, I don't know whether they should have just kept it as, the classic format of just qualifying and race.
Here's the problem with the sprint in a track like Baku. I think it can really work effectively at certain tracks, but
That's
with
what
Baku,
I'm saying.
it's so high jeopardy that
That's
I
what I'm
think
saying, yeah.
drivers will almost be a bit what's the word, tentative about making overtakes, because obviously you could qualify P3, for example, try and make that move into P2 to start on the front row in the race, but if you get it wrong, you're at the back of the grid because you crashed.
Of course,
So,
yeah, literally.
I think
And when it comes up to, for example, that turn right by the castle and
turn 8.
turn 1 as well, for example, it's quite tight in Baku. To be honest, obviously, the corners and turns are where drivers are supposed to make overtakes. However, in tracks like Baku, because of such long straights, that's where pace really plays a part.
That's probably the safest place to make, and that's probably where I'd assume the majority of the moves will be made in the sprint, just because, like I said, drivers won't want to risk their race to get a couple of points in the sprint.
I mean, in an actual race, obviously, they try to reserve the tyre compounds to last, however many laps. That's why they drop their pace sometimes. It's just that, but a sprint obviously is no pit stops unless damage. So it literally is just drivers giving it their all, trying to get in front.
Absolutely.
Which is why I don't think Baku's the greatest circuit for it. Like I said, I think just the long straights where cars reach top speeds of over 200 miles an hour. I think that's where that's where it's going to come down to overtakes. But then again, it's also going to come down to, some cars are faster than the others. So how fair can it really be? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, we'll wait and see. We could be proven completely wrong.
Of course.
In terms of Baku as a circuit, what do you think?
I quite like it. I'm not gonna lie to you. Not for a sprint like we've just been saying, but I kind of like it for the race. Brings out the all in the cars as well. I think Baku always reminds me of the Chinese Grand Prix because obviously it was supposed to be last weekend or the weekend before. I can't really remember, but the Chinese Grand Prix over 50%, over half of the track is taken at full throttle.
Mm-hmm.
So
because it's got that really long back straight.
Of course,
and so does Baku.
And like I said, Baku cars reach speeds of over 200 miles an hour, which is just really it's entertaining to watch. That's why I like it.
The thing I love about Baku, which is why I'm probably gonna say it's my favorite street circuit. My opinions can change quite a bit, but at the minute I think it's my favorite. Just because it has such variation, it's got those 90-degree corners. Yep. It's got those tight and twisty bit into turn 8 in the old town of Baku.
And that's straight off the long straight, isn't it? No, sorry, it's not.
It's after those 90-degree corners.
90-degree corners.
And then you've obviously got the long straight where you'll see a lot of overtaking. So I think it's a track that gives you a bit of everything. So that's why I like it. It's also high jeopardy, and you've got to get close to those walls to get the fastest quali time.
Of course, which I think is where Sergio Perez feels right at home.
Mm-hmm. As a street circuit specialist.
I mean, we covered in the last episode about the Saudi Arabian one. You said the reason why he's so good at street circuits is probably because he's more fearless than the other drivers when it comes to driving very close to the walls at high speeds.
Exactly. In terms of our predictions, who do you think will get pole position?
Dare I say anything other than Red Bull?
Yeah.
I think... I mean, like I said, when it comes to these long straights, it literally comes down to pace because you're not really required to do any special maneuvers. It's just foot down and go. You got to time your gear shifts. You got to hope your car's performing well. And for stuff like that, I'd say it just comes down to Red Bull being the fastest car on the grid right now. However, I could be wrong. This is the thing, like I said about F1. We say all this. However, when the race comes, we could either be just proven completely wrong or we could be completely right.
I think the big question is whether Perez will continue his good form in street circuits. Will he get pole position, do you think? I think he might do.
He might do. However, like I said, street circuits, driving close to the walls, he's good at. However, this one, I keep saying it, but it does have a very, very, very long straight. So that I think that's where other drivers are just going to feel it's like a normal racetrack, not a street circuit one, because it's quite wide as well.
Yeah, but I guess that's neutralised across the whole grid, whereas for the first, especially early sectors, I think it really relies on you having that skill set.
Yeah.
Especially at turn 8, for example.
Turn 8's like a squiggly line, basically.
Yeah, and that's where I think Perez will have the advantage.
So you do 90-degree turns, turn 8, and straight out of turn 8, you have a 90-degree turn into the long straight.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going to go for Sergio Perez for pole position. I just think that when it comes to street circuits, he's probably second to none, especially in the car like Red Bull. So I'm going to go for Perez, Verstappen, and
You want to say
I want to
Alonso?
say Leclerc, only because Leclerc's historically very good around Baku. But it all depends on whether Ferrari can have managed to make any progress over the month break that we've had. So yeah, I'm going to go with Perez, Verstappen, Leclerc for my top 3 in quali. What about you?
You're going to call me crazy.
What?
Okay. I also agree that a Red Bull will take pole position. I am going to go Verstappen pole, Perez. I'm going to go Perez third. And for second place, you're going to call me crazy. But I'm going to go for either Russell or Hamilton.
You reckon Mercedes will be there?
Yeah, I mean, after their great result in qualifying, I remember Lewis said, let's now turn this into something great in the race, and he managed to get P2. I think that's done nothing other than motivate him and the team. Russell already wants to get back after last race, after Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they don't get P2. However, I also wouldn't be surprised if they do. I think like I said, they've got just drive and ambition now to
So
just
are you
make
going
it.
to go for Russell or Hamilton for P2?
I'm gonna go for Hamilton P2.
So Verstappen, Hamilton, Perez.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope this race, everyone's cars are still intact. I hope Russell can give his all, and we could see how great he can perform on this type of circuit, where like I said, it just comes down to just ambition and just pace, really.
Yeah, and in terms of the race, obviously I predicted Perez, Verstappen, Leclerc's the front 3, but I just don't think that Ferrari have the race pace. So I'm going to go with, I think Perez will take victory, Verstappen second, and I think I will go for Russell in P3.
I mean, Mercedes have also fixed up a lot when it comes to like the bouncing, for example, of last season, where we saw Hamilton leave the car in physical pain, holding his lower back.
Yeah, and just saying that it's the worst. And Daniel Ricciardo said it feels like a bouncing basketball on your head.
I remember last season, FP1 Bahrain, first time we saw the cars, sorry, not FP1, testing, yeah. First time we saw the cars out. Because of the new, rules and everything introduced that season as well, I think most cars had problems that the drivers were complaining about.
Yeah.
Most cars, had bouncing as well. However, basically every car fixed the problems that the drivers were complaining about, other than Mercedes.
Yeah, and Mercedes were feeling it horribly in Baku. Thankfully, I don't think there's any porpoising issues this year. So
exactly, yeah.
Hopefully that will be something that the drivers' backs can avoid.
Yeah, I mean, the worst thing when it comes to bouncing is not the corners, it's the long straights. Because for a long time, you're just obviously in pain. You're just like basketball to the head.
It's also making your head shake and you can't see properly. It's got to affect your vision as well. So yeah, thankfully that's gone. So who are you going for in terms of your podium for the race?
Podium. I think I'm gonna go for a Red Bull Mercedes podium again. I think it's gonna be. I think I'm gonna go for a brave call out here and just keep it the same. I'm gonna say Verstappen, Hamilton, Perez for podium.
That's one boring.
I know. Race. However, I think it's gonna end like that. But I really don't think it's going to stay like that throughout the whole race, if you know what I mean. I think it's going to be...
You think it's going to change
I think it's going to be changing around a lot. However, this pole position you asked me for, is that for the actual race or for the sprint?
I literally forgot it's a sprint weekend.
Because I was going to say, the one I gave you was for the sprint. I think it's going to be Verstappen, Hamilton, and Alonso for the sprint. But I think they're also going to maintain it. I know it sounds boring right now. I'm saying the same thing for the sprint start... and race start and race finish, but I can see that happening. However, I do think it's going to change around a lot during the race.
Yeah, I mean, all I can say is no matter what our predictions are, they're probably going to be wrong.
Probably.
And we can talk about it in our next review. But yeah, hopefully Baku will produce a great race. And yeah, that'll be it for this edition of Round the Outside here on the Speed and Shoot podcast. We hope you all enjoyed. And we'll catch you in the next one.